Vietnamese writer-director Lee Van Kuyt brings us From Below, or at least that is the UK title of the movie. In America, this movie is called The REQUIN, which is the French name for shark, and this movie is set in Vietnam. I guess it makes sense to someone. And this stars Alicia Silverstone, best known for her role in Clueless, Batman and Robin, among others. I have actually seen her make appearances in some other movies of recent years, smaller roles, supporting roles, cameos, but here she is centre stage as the main character. Now this movie is very, very similar to the recent movie Great White, and a little bit like The Shallows in a lot of ways. I suppose there are already so many kind of shark movie plots you can possibly have, so they do kind of almost seem like they're the same movie more or less. The basic plot is this. We have a couple having a luxurious holiday vacation in Vietnam, and yes, this is unlike any other Vietnam movie you have ever seen, and they have a kind of like cabin which is suspended above the sea, you know, and it's kind of attached to a variety of jetties and walkways and things, so it's very luxurious. But the trouble is here, of course, is this couple have gone off season, and there is a huge storm which essentially rips this this kind of cabin off its jetty and then pushes it out to sea, and our couple are kind of left stranded with dwindling supplies, and yes, there are sharks in the water. So let me ask you a question. Do you like sleeping? Ah yes, the slumber of night. A good night's sleep is good for everyone. I love it. And if you like sleeping, you're going to like this movie, because boy, do they sleep a lot in this movie. If you want a drinking game, have a shot every time someone wakes up from a slumber in this movie, and you will be out of it. Now I have to say, I feel this movie may be very much maligned. Now I have watched a lot of bad shark movies. If you've watched this channel for any at the time, you will see plenty of shark movies reviewed here. And I have a feeling this one is going to get absolutely beasted in the reviews. And trust me, I'm going to have my pound of flesh in just a minute. But I am going to try and be fair, because I do feel this movie is not as bad as a lot of these kind of like crappy shark movies that we know we get. And there are a couple of points here that I think are worth mentioning in a positive light. Number one. Okay, now the sharks don't actually show up until 25 minutes into the end. I'm going to come on to it again, don't worry. But when we do have these attacks, and the actual attacks themselves I have mixed feelings about, but what is good is some decent prosthetic work when we see kind of like limbs being kind of torn off and kind of the remains of body parts, and some fairly good prosthetic work, I have to say. And you know, it looks pretty realistic and quite gruesome at times, and I've got to say I thought that was done quite well. The director has also got a little bit of an eye for some artistic shots here. Now there are some problems with the direction, don't get me wrong, but there are some sequences here where I thought looked particularly kind of like well shot, and some of them are kind of virtual shots. You know, if we have, for example, some real nice shots where we see like kind of like the shark fin kind of coming towards the camera, if you like, and the camera's pulling back, so it almost looks like a car coming towards you. And I've got to say, there are some shots that I thought were really well done and kind of look very kind of like dramatic. They're well framed and kind of look dynamic on screen. And there's a few other instances as well, especially, you know, I think this director, I'm not familiar with him, but I feel like his strength may be in still photography, because there's lots of like sequences here. I can imagine if you take a snapshot of it, it will look fantastic. It's just the problem is that here it's a movie rather than, you know, a still photo. But there are some good shots and artistic shots, and ones that look great, and obviously the kind of the location. I think it was actually shot in Orlando, to be honest, but it looks kind of quite you know, tropical and stuff. I mean, I think possibly some bits of a film there, but you know, wherever it was shot, over multiple locations, I suspect, you know, it's quite, you know, beautiful kind of scenery and things like this. And then let's talk about the acting, because I thought this is one thing where I gotta say, I reckon that the acting might be a little bit critiqued, shall we say, but I don't necessarily think it was all that bad. Now, I read one review of this movie prior to filming this, and I tried to avoid kind of watching and reading reviews prior to doing my own, because I don't want to sort of influence my own thoughts, so to speak. And one of the things I did see was, oh, the acting was terrible. I don't know if it is. I actually don't think the acting was all that bad. In actual fact, I think there's some sequences where I have to say I thought the acting was fairly good. I mean, Alicia Silverstone does a pretty good job of showing this kind of like internal sort of turmoil that she's kind of feeling. Obviously, having a you know, it's established she's had a miscarriage, and it looks like it was quite late in term, so it's obviously going to be quite stressful. And I've got to say, I think she does a fairly good job of kind of showing you that without being super obvious, and kind of showing that she's got this internal sort of thing going on where she's trying to kind of like hold it back, but she's not entirely successful. And as we go through the film, she's kind of getting more and more unraveled, and kind of, and another thing as well I think was good, she kind of looks like she's just dishevelled by the end of the movie. And you find a lot of kind of actors don't want to look sort of like they've been dragged through a hedge backwards, but she really does kind of look like, you know, she's really at the end of it by then. The problem is with the acting, I feel, is that the movie surrounding it is fairly poor. It's poorly written, and there's some horrible dialogue, and the characters are quite unlikable. And I think those factors may make the acting seem worse than it is. But the thing is, I do feel there are some sequences that are well acted from both kind of lead characters. However, there are some sequences that I feel are not well acted either. So it is a bit of a mixed bag. You know, maybe I'm getting the impression that maybe this wasn't like a film that had a lot of takes. But I would say the acting, I wouldn't say it was bad. I thought the acting was, for the most part, pretty good, with a few exceptions of a few wobbly kind of takes here and there. Okay, but let me move on to what does not work. Now, this is a strange film in regards to its kind of setup, because it's billed as a shark film. I mean, the name of it outside of the UK is the REQUIN, or the REQUIN, which means the shark. I mean, surely it should be Le Shark if it's a French name, but whatever. Anyway, but the sharks don't turn up until at least partway through the last act of the movie, and they're not even seen before that. So it's not about sharks at all, really. It's about kind of these people who are stranded at sea rather than sharks. There is a shark sequence, and you know, it's an extended sequence, but it's not really about sharks, if that makes sense. It just culminates in that. So I think you know, you have to go into this movie with that in mind, to be honest with you. But I think it's a poor decision to kind of market it really as a shark film when that's only part of it. It's more of a survival film, a survival at sea film that includes sharks. But the problem with that is, of course, it's a little bit kind of like dragged out. The first hour, it's about an hour and a half movie, and the first hour is a little dull. I mean, the first act of the movie is a lot of like scenery shots and kind of like, look how great Vietnam is and things like that. Look at the friendly people. Look at the great temples. Look at the beaches. Blah blah blah. So a lot of that, and then we kind of get this kind of like the character development, which I appreciate you got to have that, and I like it when the characters are well developed, but they're not very well written. I mean, Alicia Silverstone's character comes across as quite unlikable. You know, I understand the movie establishes that she's had a traumatic experience, but I've got to say she comes across as quite mean to her husband, who's taken her on this holiday to try and kind of like help her get over it. And she kind of seems like quite combative towards him, so it doesn't really make you really feel for her in a way. And I think like more work could have been done with that, because she comes across as being a little bit one note. And again, I'm not blaming necessarily Alicia Silverstone for that. Just the way the character is written, I feel, is a little poor there. Unfortunately, you know, for her really. So we don't really get a lot of nuance. There's a little bit here and there through the movie, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that was particularly a well-written sort of character necessarily. And you kind of just want stuff to happen. My God. Okay, so let's just get into some juicier stuff. So Jesus Christ, these you've not seen a movie with more dumb stuff in it in a long time. I mean, whew. Here's the main problem for me with this film. It just has too much dumb stuff in it. Dumb decisions made by characters, unbelievable kind of situations that the writer director has kind of put these characters in. The physics-defying things, just you know. I could point out loads. I'm not going to go through every single one. You know, oh, you missed this bit. I don't want to kind of point out every single one, but you know, these people are on a, for example, you know, right at the beginning of the movie, a kind of a hotel thing or a, you know, cabin which is out on a jetty, but they don't look at the weather. I mean, for a start, you know. The amount of times these characters go to sleep in this film, it's silly. It's just, you know, they're having these disasters. They end up both going to sleep, but then they wake up. The disaster is like doubled in intensity for whatever. You know, I'm not going to go into the plot details, but it's amazing how many times these characters end up being asleep, and then they wake up and they're in a much worse situation. Like, why aren't you taking it in turns to go to sleep? Things like this. It's just dumb decision after dumb decision. There's a point where Alicia Silverstone is kind of more or less inland. She's on a kind of a beach, a shallow beach, but she just seems to just stay there until the tide is kind of like over her again. It's just like there's so many dumb stuff, so many dumb things in this movie, and you know, it doesn't help you kind of like the characters when they're continually making stupid decisions, but then it's you know, it's kind of like compounded by the movie just doing more dumb stuff upon more dumb stuff. Story-wise, it's slow, you know, it's fairly uneventful. When we do see stuff happening, when we do get the kind of like quote-unquote action sequences, I've got to say they're not particularly kind of thrilling. You know, we have this storm, which is kind of like initially kind of throwing our kind of couple around. It's kind of like filmed in a way that is just super low budget, and again, the budget we're going to come onto again. But it just doesn't look particularly kind of dynamic. It's sometimes there's some real kind of obvious like silly things that happen. For example, we're meant to believe at one point that kind of this house is on a kind of like an angle, and they're kind of, you know, that the husband's trapped behind this bed, but we just see like water on the floor, just obviously pooling on obviously a horizontal and flat manner, but this is just a camera that's turned. Things like this, it's just like, oh man, it's just so silly at times. The CGI and the kind of the visual effects in general, it's some of the worst CGI. This movie unfortunately has like this fake feeling all the way through it. Even on kind of like, not particularly kind of like, just like the sea, you know, people out on the sea. You know, it just looks like that green screen effect, or this kind of like this fakeness and things like that. It never really feels like these people are really kind of out to sea. You know, the way it's kind of filmed, the kind of how the background is moving against the foreground, things like this. It just doesn't look real ever. And then we have like incredibly bad CGI, including the kind of like this little floating jetty that's kind of going out. The sharks kind of look different. I mean, he does use a lot of stock footage, but there are some sequences where he comes in and we actually have the actual shark attacks. I can never decide. At times it looks like there's multiple sharks. At times they look completely different sizes, and then it ends up being that there's just one. And just like, what? It's kind of like just a bit of a mess, unfortunately. And you know, this review's kind of going on. To be honest with you, I feel like I can kind of continue on and on and on with this movie, but it's just unfortunately poorly put together. But I do think there is some element of enjoyment if you can just have that expectation. It's not necessarily a shark film. It's kind of a survival film with some sharks in it. But have real low expectations. It's just unfortunately, it's not as good as even an average shark movie, unfortunately. I mean, look at Great White, who I didn't really like. This is worse than that. I'm sad to say, and that weren't good. So even though I've tried to kind of say some positive things here, ultimately for me this is a 3 out of 10. It is not a good film. It is not a good film. How you know, I think when you're doing something like that, you've got to have a little bit more budget and a little bit more kind of oversight with stuff like this. There's just too many bad shark movies out there now. Anyway, what did you think of it? Leave me a comment. It's a 3 out of 10. What did you think? And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.